Courage is contagious, and we hope to see it spread like wildfire throughout our nation. Thank you for joining us today on the Gold Report, where we hope to inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your everyday life. I'm so glad you're here. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We have an exciting guest in our studio today. We'll be right back. Gold Care is the replacement for the current healthcare system. How does it work? First, you join our Gold Care Association, which keeps the government out of your business. Then you can schedule with a provider of your choice and meet through our proprietary telehealth platform. We work to get you well and off of prescription medication. All costs are upfront and transparent, as it should be. Do something for yourself and your family, and put a doctor in your pocket. We are ready for you. Jose Jiminez is part of Colleen Meadows' IP and patent practice groups, where he specializes in the electrical, electromechanical, and medical device sections. He also serves as general counsel for nonprofit organizations and as patent counsel for startups. Jose previously served as chief intellectual property counsel for American Medical Systems and was a partner with 2 intellectual property firms in Minnesota. Jose counsels clients with business acumen honed from his years of experience in corporate transactional work, experience he has gained through many years of in-house leadership positions held at Fortune 500 companies. His work as a general manager and quality director provided him corporate operational experience in both the U.S. and in Latin America. Jose earned his Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and his master's in business administration from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Welcome to the studio, Jose.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gold. It's good to be here with you today.
It's great. We don't always get a chance to have guests in studio, so it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have an interesting subject to talk about today, and let's start with the really interesting plus positive side of the news, which is, we've been in this space, this medical freedom space now for several years. And as a doctor lawyer myself, when 2020 rolled around, I just saw a lot of mistruths from the government agencies, the 3 little agencies like the CDC and the NIH and the FDA, and we started pushing back hard. And America's Frontline Doctors' mission was really to make sure that vaccine mandates never became the law of the land. So we really started filing a lot of lawsuits towards that. So we did a lot of science in those lawsuits, but mostly we were really trying to protect people's constitutional rights. And this, I felt, was my personal mission, especially in 2021. So we brought lots of lawsuits. I'm not sure if you even knew how many we brought. We probably brought about 12 lawsuits. We brought lawsuits on behalf of the COVID recovered college student, the COVID recovered soldier. We sued UCLA and then University of Nevada, and we sued the Department of Defense. And in addition, we sued Mayor de Blasio for we felt he was harming small businesses, et cetera. And then one of the biggest lawsuits we brought was against Kaiser Permanente. And the way that one unfolded in 2021 was, just to bring people back to, 2021, people were very panicked about COVID. They were very panicked about getting early treatment and lockdowns. But a lot of people also were having a lot of difficulty with their jobs. They're working for a corporation or an organization that was insisting that they take a shot. So we were being contacted at America's Frontline Doctors by really thousands and thousands of people looking for lawyers who would help them not get fired or looking for legal advice. This was a really big issue. By the way, it was really sad. It was incredibly sad. We represented San Francisco firefighters. We talked to a lot of pilots and flight attendants, et cetera. And over 2021, a lot of people from Kaiser started contacting America's Frontline Doctors. And ultimately, we'd set up a webpage for them, and about 4,000 Kaiser employees came to us. And they came to us because Kaiser was mandating, sometime I think it was going to take effect in early 22. Yeah. They were mandating that their employees would have to take a shot to keep their employment. And, Kaiser's a huge employer out West. So that's why so many people came to us. And the question on the table was, can either the government or can a private employer force a person to take these COVID shots? That was the question on the table. And we jumped into that fight. We jumped into that in a big way. And we started filing a big lawsuit. We filed a big lawsuit against Kaiser in October 2021. And you had seen that lawsuit, I think.
I had seen that lawsuit. And just as a quick aside, it's great to have you leading the charge, Dr. Gold, in the sense that your medical and legal background makes you uniquely qualified to see those issues. You've done a lot for the medical community, but then seeing you come in and saying, what in the law can we pull out to help our employees, to help our fellow citizens and neighbors, so that they can avoid the vaccine, so to speak. And you're filing the Kaiser Permanente case was really important. A lot of jurisprudence, and in my experience, is really with the Jacobson, Massachusetts case. And everybody's rallying around the vaccine.
So hold on a sec. No, but let's go back to what you were just saying. That really is, I think, what made me different. When I jumped into this space in 2020, I aligned with a lot of physicians. We stood there in the Supreme Court and we're advocating, no lockdowns. Lockdowns don't help. The masks don't help. Early treatment helps. But that was kind of the doctor end of it. I was always very alarmed about the legal implications. For example, we'd never had a situation in America where you lock down healthy people. I felt that to this day, I feel that violated the Constitution. You can't prevent people from assembling or getting together. The government has an interest, a state interest. If the person is sick, there is a thing of quarantining ill people. But all of a sudden, we were essentially quarantining well people.
Right.
So I was jumping into that, and then I was really looking at these issues of potential mandates through the lens of a doctor and a lawyer.
Right.
And it was difficult to see. Many lawyers didn't. Many vaccine lawyers, for example, they weren't quite understanding the shots. Really, these shots were not vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was a space.
Yeah, and most lawyers understand that, well, it's FDA approved. Yeah, but there's a lot of FDA approved language when you talk about EUA, excuse me. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's okay. I was previously involved in the medical device industry, and I had battles with my own doctor saying, no, this hasn't gone through the right sort of clinical studies in order to get this approved. It takes years to do this. And you're trying to call this a vaccine. So what's going to happen 6 months later? Couldn't answer that question. So you starting to identify that issue, helping those 4,000 employees at least have their say in court was a big thing for them.
Yeah. So in late 2020, we doctors looked at the science of it. And it was very clear since the beginning, it was never a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to share with the audience, the definition of vaccine has changed over the years. I'm not sure if people are even aware of that, but it changed from being immunity to a disease to just kind of reducing the transmission. And like the CDC has just changed it. And we're going to put that up on the screen so you can see the exact, black and white definition, how the CDC has changed the definition. But we all grew up with the concept of a vaccine stopping the transmission of contagious illness between people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a doctor, I knew that's not what these shots did. But as a lawyer, I knew that the vaccine legal cases, the judges were always saying that the only state interest government has in a thing is if it stops transmission between people.
Right.
The government doesn't get a say on just medical treatment, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The only time the government potentially has an interest is for the whole public health, for the whole good of everybody.
Right.
So I was wearing both hats. I'm saying, well, gosh darn it, these don't work like vaccines. They're not stopping the transmission. And at the same time, we've got all these vaccine precedent cases that are relying on the stopping of the transmission of it. So you remember back, in 21, everyone was talking a lot about Jacobson. So I don't know if you want to share with everybody, because you started to bring it, what they mean when they say the word Jacobson.
Well, Jacobson really was the leading U.S. Supreme Court case, started back in 1905 in Massachusetts, where they were dealing with the smallpox vaccine and giving citizens an opportunity either to take the vaccine or choose not to and pay a fine. Yeah. And because even back then, people felt that it's not for the government to determine if you should be taking some kind of medical vaccine or any kind of treatment. And that's been really the case. That's been the strongest case in this whole area. But it starts off with the wrong premise, as you brought out.
Yeah. So Jacobson was in Massachusetts, and Jacobson was the plaintiff, and he didn't want to take the smallpox shot. I don't really know his reasons why, but he didn't want to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And the government, tried to force him to take it. And the Supreme Court said that he could be forced to take it. And so people who were pro-mandates would rely on that. But there's a big second half to that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You could be forced to take it, or you could pay a modest fine, which I calculated in today's dollars is $150.
Mm-hmm.
or you can get a medical exemption. So that was actually the holding in Jacobson in 1905. So yeah, people have been concerned about this for a long, long time.
Which is fairly cutting edge. Way back then, in terms of seeing that. And as Americans, we're used to having choices. We're used to not being told what to do by the government. So that legislation actually wasn't a bad thing.
Right. So you know, it's funny listening to you. So we didn't really know each other in 2021, but when I was speaking to a lot of other lawyers, people on the pro-freedom side understood that Jacobson really helped us. It really was a freedom solution. It said, yeah, the government has an interest, but you can opt out of this interest, you know, if you do these things. But people on the pro-government side, the anti-freedom side, they also thought Jacobson was a good precedent for them because they just looked at the first half of that sentence, which I thought was very interesting. Right. That they were relying, yes, the government can mandate. No, you can opt out. But anyway, that was the law. That's what everybody was relying on. Everybody was calling Jacobson. Every lawsuit, if you go back to the COVID years, was focused on Jacobson.
Right. Which begs the question, why, when the vaccine was rolled out, weren't Americans given the option? You know?
Right. That was black letter law. So I expect, once I read Jacobson, I expected that there wouldn't be such a fight on this because for me, great, we'll pay a modest fine or whatever. But it was, I don't know. It was like a collective insanity, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a question of control and, wanting to move the populace in a certain direction and whatnot. So
people were nervous. And by the way, just as an aside, because we're both lawyers, but non-lawyers may not realize that the way law comes down in America is Congress or the legislative branch writes the law, but there's usually debate about it or somebody has a question and challenges it, and then the judge has to decide what does the law really, as written, really mean. And that's called so when a judge does that and comes up with a ruling, that ruling can become precedent for future rulings. So that's just really the way we kind of incrementally move the law along is we look at prior cases. What's the precedent? That's why we keep talking about a case from 100 years ago, is that was the most landmark vaccine case that our Supreme Court had. That's just how the law works. Yep. Always is the precedent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not everybody knows that.
Yeah. And then people try to distinguish that by looking obviously at the facts and say, well, that shouldn't apply for X, Y, Z because the facts are different. Well, you can make a reasonable sort of determination that it follows that line of reasoning, and you can still do that. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's a really good point, is that both sides then will take that same precedent and argue, well, this fact is a little different, or this fact. And in fact, that's what happened in 2021. People on the pro-freedom side kind of quoted Jacobson, and people on the anti-freedom side were quoting Jacobson too. And I would say on the pro-freedom side, even though the government said you could be forced to take the shot, it was an entirely different thing because smallpox at the time had a lethality of about 35%. Right. Where SARS-2, according to our own government, was 0.003%. So this is not comparable. So it's true. You take the fact and you try to distinguish it. But the point was, like in 2021, everybody was talking about Jacobson. I couldn't find any lawyers who didn't think any COVID litigation we might bring wouldn't be Jacobson. Right. Would be. And I was
me included. Probably
everybody, 100%.
Yeah.
And you yourself, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, me included.
And there were people who had been in the vaccine legal space for more than 10 years who I spoke with, and they all felt that Jacobson was the precedent you had to revolve around. And I was like, no. And I kept trying to find lawyers to say, it's really not about Jacobson. And the reason from a medical perspective is Jacobson said that the government has an interest in this because it stops the transmission of a contagious illness. And any ruling that the Supreme Court came up with was based on that premise of stopping the transmission.
Yes.
But the SARS to the COVID-19 vaccines did not stop the transmission. And just a moment about the science. If you go back to 2020 applications that Moderna and Pfizer submitted to the FDA, not only does it not say that it stops transmission of the virus, Pfizer and Moderna never even requested that it should say that. Pfizer and Moderna acknowledge that their application only was to reduce symptoms from severe to moderate and moderate to mild, not to stop transmission. It was right there in the originating documents that Pfizer and Moderna submitted to the FDA. I want to share that because sometimes people look at me and say, how did you know this? And you seem like a genius. I said, no. You just had to read the papers. They didn't ask for it to stop. They didn't ask for it to be approved for stopping transmission, they never asked for that. They just said it stops the severity of the disease. Well, the moment you start talking about severity of a disease, that's treatment.
Yeah.
If I take, if I choose to take an antibiotic for bacterial pneumonia, that's treatment. That's not stopping transmission. Yeah, that's my personal treatment.
Immunity.
Yeah,
in the patient.
Right. So I just knew from the get-go that this wasn't stopping transmission, but I knew that because the paperwork that Pfizer and Moderna submitted to the FDA did not claim to stop transmission. In other words, you didn't need anything higher than an ability to read. You didn't, I would say any 10th grader could have seen this, or even 8th grader if you look at the papers, and we'll share that link with the audience.
Right.
But that's where it all came from. That's where, my idea that this wasn't a Jacobson case, it wasn't a transmission case. So there are a lot of Supreme Court precedents, though, that are in the healthcare space. And one of them is a line of cases that's kind of known as the Cruzan cases.
Right.
And I don't know how familiar you are with that case, the Nancy Cruzan case.
She was in a car accident.
Yeah.
And then she was really, she had been deprived of oxygen. Yeah. And basically the neurosurgeon put her on, I think it was some kind of ventilator or something. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nancy Cruzan. Yeah. Yep.
So in that case, it's really, they were talking about in the state of Missouri, her parents wanted, I think, to basically disconnect her from feeding tubes and whatnot so that she can basically pass, because she was in a vegetative state, basically.
Exactly.
And there was a lot of pushback by the hospital and the state in terms of what standard do we use in order to review what facts we need, because unfortunately Ms. Cruzan couldn't speak for herself. Yeah. And they had evidence from friends. I think
it was her husband.
Yeah, that said that she wouldn't want to live like this. But they wrestled with that quite a bit. But the bottom line in that whole case was making the decision that whether you want to have a medical treatment or not, and even feeding in this case would have been a medical treatment, that's ultimately your decision, not the decision of the hospital or the state.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So she was in a terrible accident, and she was in what's called a persistent vegetative state. And there was, I don't remember exactly, but I think the conflict was between her parents and her husband. And, but ultimately the courts found that a person's decision to take a treatment or not is absolutely their own personal choice. Like it's unequivocal. It's black and white. You get to decide. In that case, they had a conflict between the husband and the parents, but the government doesn't get to have a say. It's just your own personal decision. And that line of cases, I think Cruzan, that was in the 90s, and that's very strong black letter law, that a person gets to choose their own treatment. So I thought, when I looked at the science behind these shots, that any litigation we should have should be under Cruzan, because it's essentially personal treatment. I mean, the application said it can reduce your symptoms from severe to moderate and moderate to mild. And by the way, I just want you to know, it doesn't even work like that. The reason it doesn't work like that is because the virus mutated a lot, and the original virus is no longer the one that's around. And so really it's irrelevant, wholly irrelevant. But even in the beginning, it was only to reduce your symptoms. Reducing your symptoms is personal treatment. Right. And I was saying that this is under Cruzan. It should be decided this is your personal treatment. It's not under Jacobson. So there's a lot of chit chat that I was doing back in 2021 about this being under Cruzan. And I was looking for lawyers who would help me draft a case for the judges to recognize this wasn't to be argued as a vaccine case. It's supposed to be argued as a medical treatment case. Right. And it was really hard. I couldn't find anyone.
Well, everybody agreed erroneously that it was a vaccine. It was not a vaccine. And so if you start off with the wrong premise, that's why it's so hard for you. You would find any attorney that was going to actually put that in an actual complaint. Yeah. Because it's like, hey, it's been run through the FDA, but even medical treatments are run through the FDA. Medical treatments like pharmaceuticals get approved by the FDA, and so do vaccines. But just because the government called it a vaccine and it got sort of the EUA approval, then we're good. So I could see where a lot of lawyers back then
for sure
would be reticent to support you on that. But looking at some of the cases and looking more closely at Cruzan, it's so easy, clear to see that now, and it's rather unfortunate that didn't happen much sooner.
Right. So it was very slippery for the pharmaceuticals to call this vaccine, because the common feeling around the word vaccine is like a warm and fuzzy. Oh, this is a vaccine. This is a good thing. And I think the judges fell into that trap too. The lawyers fell into that trap too. But I spent a lot of 2021 looking for a lawyer who would help me develop a case against Cruzan. And then I was introduced to an attorney who said to me, wow, this is brilliant. Like, nobody's doing this. We should definitely argue this.
Right.
And that's when I met this attorney. His name is George Wentz.
Okay.
And I hired him specifically to build this case where we're going to present to the courts why it's not Jacobson, but it's Cruzan. And under Cruzan, people get to decide what they want to do. And so that's what we did. And we took all of these people who come to us from Kaiser. Again, I said there was about 4,000 people. And we filed a lawsuit to, this was to help all the Kaiser employees keep their jobs. The Kaiser was really pulling the jobs away from all these people. And by the way, a lot of these people weren't even frontline people. Some of them were back office. A lot of, virtually everybody there was working at home anyway. Very few people were on the front lines, but we also represented people whose regular job wasn't even to see patients. It would be somebody who's like an admin support person who's on a computer, that even all of those people that Kaiser wanted to mandate. So these were real people, real lives, real jobs. And so we filed this big lawsuit. And it was the first time anybody had ever filed a lawsuit using the theory of Cruzan.
Right.
And,
was there an opportunity back then to have any kind of oral arguments? Was there a preliminary hearing at all?
Yeah. So how complicated the process is for lawsuits. You'll have a TRO hearing, and then you'll have a preliminary injunction hearing, and then you'll have a trial, and this process can take years. So we submitted the first pleading on October 7th, 2021. So that's when we filed it. And I think it was either for a TRO, temporary restraining order, or it was a preliminary injunction. I'm not sure. But we submitted this amazing, amazing lawsuit, about 30 pages, I think. And we went through all the Cruzan Jacobson arguments. And strangely enough, the judge turned it back in a matter of hours. My recollection is it was hours. It might have been a day.
So he made a decision on the pleadings?
He made a decision on the pleadings, and it was very rapid.
Okay.
I remember the time thinking there's no way he could have even read it, because it was pretty dense writings, and we also had a lot of expert witnesses. And I remember,
you supported it with a pretty well written memo. as well.
Yes.
2 weeks later, you filed a memo which clarified your Cruzan theory.
Yes.
Along with the additional, affidavits from several doctors explaining that this is a medical treatment.
Exactly. And so
you think it would make it easier for the judge to understand it.
So the judge turned it back really fast, and I thought he just couldn't have read it because it was too fast. You would have needed a month, I think, to review the papers. He basically just dismissed it, which at the time I remember thinking was very strange, because it was very, very strong.
For not stating a cause of action? Do you remember?
I'm not certain.
Interesting.
But he just dismissed it. When I went back and looked at the dismissal, it was so perplexing that I want to share with people that there was actually 2 causes of actions in that case. There was my Cruzan theory, which I knew is a really strong theory.
Exactly.
Then my attorney, George Wentz, had brought in this other theory it's called state action theory. And the case, and it added a lot of complexity to the case. And in retrospect, I think it's very clear that the judge just dismissed our pleading because of that additional state action theory. And I say that because we've pursued, and other people have pursued, this Cruzan theory, and it's won. So when you dropped off that state action theory, which seems to have been like an albatross around my neck, the case was an amazing case. But I think that this October 21 case that I filed, that the judge didn't look at thoroughly because he turned it back very quickly.
Right.
I don't even think he really evaluated the whole Cruzan argument.
No.
I think it was kind of hidden. He didn't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. It was hidden behind the state action paperwork, which went on for many, many pages.
Right.
And I'm talking about this now because I find it really upsetting that I always found it upsetting that the judge, I felt, didn't look carefully at the Cruzan arguments. I feel like that the judge's obligation is to look at everything that's presented in front of him, and I don't think he did. But we also had this other theory in there, the state action theory, which I think was very distracting for him. And perhaps he never, just as a human being, he just was exhausted by the time he got towards the end.
Well, 2/3, almost 3/4 of the complaint was written around the state action theory. And it's very complex. And but it's also very easy for him to just say, well, there's no state action here.
Yeah.
And then we were trying to characterize Kaiser Permanente as being an arm of the state, and you had plenty of evidence to show that there was that relationship. And basically, he ignored that and never got to the Cruzan argument.
Never got to the Cruzan argument.
Yeah, so this was ripe for appeal.
It's right. So what happened then? And I was really upset. I put a lot of energy and time into this Cruzan case. And then what happened when the judge dismissed it? I thought we would appeal, but my lawyer, George Wentz, recommended we don't appeal it. And I trusted his judgment. He was a seasoned litigator, and that was his assessment. And combined with the fact the judge had turned it back really fast, I thought, well, I guess we're dead in the water on this issue, and it's too complicated for the judge, it's too sciencey for the judge, or whatever. And I just kind of accepted George's recommendation not to appeal this. And it was really very heartbreaking, I think, for the 4,000 Kaiser employees, because they were facing termination. Many of them actually did get terminated. Right. And people might wonder why we're talking about this so much now. And the reason is there's been some good news, and then there's some interesting news, I would say.
Right.
So earlier this year, I think less than a month ago, this exact argument, this Cruzan argument, had been heard by, in fact, the same judge, the same district. It was the 9th district, which is above where I was. We were at the trial court level in San Francisco area. And above them, the appellate court, it's the 9th Circuit. And the 9th Circuit ruled, following the Cruzan theory, that these shots are not vaccines. They cannot be mandated because they're personal treatment choices only.
Right.
And that was the finding in June of 2024, which is excellent news for people. Let me repeat that. We have a 9th Circuit appellate court announcing that these COVID-19 shots are not vaccines as a matter of law, that they're personal treatment choices only. And the reasoning for that relied on the whole Cruzan theory. And I looked at that result just, like a couple of weeks ago, and I was really stunned because you know who the lawyer was on that?
Who's that?
Yeah. It was my lawyer, George Wentz, who essentially, best I can tell, took my words and my work. By the way, we paid him a lot of money, and went to a different case, and he argued
the same
my
theory.
work and my theory to in a different case. And I'm just,
and it's clear when you read the decision by the Court of Appeals that they felt really strongly that it was Cruzan was spot on. Yeah. And the fact that today's vaccines were not providing immunity and they were not preventing transmission. And so in this case, purely medical treatment. Yeah. And that's the way it should have come down. So they were pretty animate about it. From that standpoint. Yeah. So that's what's regrettable about sort of having to relive history, 3 years later, and you not really being on that team when that case was filed last fall.
It's so frustrating. So I want to read for everybody what the words are that I wrote. By the way, as an attorney, even though I hired this attorney, George Wentz, to do it, and again, paid him a lot of money, the whole Cruzan argument, I did the work, because I was super passionate about it. I have lots of emails from him that confirm this. And anyway, so this was my work. So these were my words in the lawsuit in October 2021 that the judge threw out prematurely. And what I said was, in contrast, the right to determine one's own medical treatment or to refuse medical treatment are fundamental, and individuals have a fundamental liberty interest in medical autonomy. A competent person has a constitutionally protected liberty interest in refusing unwanted medical treatment. That's from Cruzan. And the Cruzan finding was because this right is rooted in common law rule that forced medication is a battery, and you have a long legal tradition protecting the decision to refuse unwanted medical treatment. That is so similar to the language used by George and the other plaintiff in the other winning case.
Right.
What do you do in a situation like this? I'm very happy that this has now become the rule.
Right.
But it was stunning.
It is stunning. It's a little bit unfortunate, but I think we discussed this once before. Because it was your original work product, I think there's an opportunity there to claim it's a turn your work product. It's copyright protected. Probably should have been given an opportunity to talk to you first before it was incorporated in their work last fall. And this is something you should be given credit for
Yeah.
going forward, and any of your publications and any of your literature or your podcasts or whatnot, because of the fact that yours was the foundational work, not only as an idea, but as how it was written, that really made this case happen, just in June.
Yeah.
So there's
it's been quite.
Yeah. Because I found a couple of treatises where the attorney work product can be considered copyright protected, because it's the way you describe the idea, in your case, your theory, not the theory itself. It's the way you put it forth in the case. So it was ingenious.
Yeah.
So you should feel good about that. The regrettable portion on this as well is that had this been sort of relitigated or appealed back then, think how many lives you would have saved. What the number of cases that would have come down that would have been almost like a domino effect, in terms of the positive support we would have gotten.
Thank you for reminding us of that. I mean, that was really why I was doing the whole thing. I mean, I saw it a certain way, but I also, what I was seeing was so inconsistent with the law and inconsistent with medicine that I felt just this urgency to bring it to the courts. And we were deprived, really, because the first judge, I think, didn't really look at it. But sometimes that happens in life. And that's where you have appeal process, because then you have other judges look at things. And we didn't have that. And I'm filled with regret. It's unfortunate.
This is an example where two things. You have to have courage, and you have determination. Okay, courage to go back at it again, and determination that you're going to follow it through. And that's what's rather regrettable from your former counsel, unfortunately. That was lacking in that case, because it was there, it's well understood, and it's just maybe just redirecting the judge's attention or getting a new judge's attention on that.
I really don't know why he advised not to appeal. It just seems crazy to me. I actually called him to ask him what the heck, essentially why he stole my work. Why, I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And he tried to say that he had his own idea independent of me, which was a joke, because you needed to be a doctor to see that this wasn't a transmission thing. It was a treatment thing. And also I have plenty of emails from him where he was very hot, like everyone was, on Jacobson and not on Cruzan. So it's just disappointing. It's been a challenging 4 years. I have a lot of a lot of challenges.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, but at least you can feel good at the fact that you were involved in foundational work in this area, and that the basis of your work is going to continue, because obviously this case that just came down is going to be big in a lot of other
Very
states.
Huge.
Yeah.
And that's great. And so I want to leave everybody on the subject with the fact, again, that the Ninth Circuit has found that these shots are not vaccines. That is a big deal.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
A big deal. Sorry, Dr. Fauci.
Sorry, Dr. Fauci.
How
do you feel? Let's turn. How do you feel just in general? I mean, we do see a lot of things coming up. I mean, a lot of noise. Did you see that the state of Kansas has now sued Pfizer, saying that Pfizer misrepresented themselves, that there were too many adverse events and that Pfizer didn't disclose this. So we have now state attorney generals
stepping up. And I think even in the state of Florida, same thing with
Florida.
That Pfizer didn't disclose that there were some materials in there that shouldn't have been in there. And so now you can't, impose those vaccines or treatments on people. So again, this would have happened 2 or 3 years ago. That movement would have happened a lot sooner. So, but great work.
Well, great. Well, thank you for joining for this conversation.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me today. It was a pleasure working with you again, and working with your legal side for a change.
That's right. For sure. Excellent. So thank you. I hope that this was interesting for folks, and that the take-home message is that the shots are not considered vaccines as a matter of law. That is the highest court ruling in the United States at this time. I don't think it's going to go up to the Supreme Court. So I think that will be the precedential ruling, until the next, go around that Big Pharma tries to do to us. But that's a very big deal. And we just always encourage people to push back if you see something going on wrong, just to have that extra 10% more courage in your daily life than you think you are, that it's always better to stand up for the things and the truth that you see. And thank you so much for joining us today on The Gold Report, and we'll see you next time.